أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. I pray that everyone is doing well, inshallah. We'll continue with our sessions as we've been doing. The month of March, inshallah, we'll continue with the sessions. One announcement that I have to make is that inshallah the week of basically the Tuesday before March 24th, I'm not sure which day it's going to be exactly, we will be skipping that week. So inshallah, if you take a look at the flyers that are placed on Mizan Institute's Facebook page, you'll see that for the sessions that I have, we're going to be skipping that week. That's one point, and inshallah, also another point is that daylight savings are going to be coming up. That's a good thing for us here because we'll be sticking to the 7 p.m. time, which means that from next time we have the session is going to start basically before salat, or like an hour before salat, roughly an hour before salat. So that way I won't have to rush through my salat so that we can be live at 7 p.m. If you've been with us in the past sessions, we started doing the rulings of salat. And as we were doing the rulings of salat, we also mentioned that now that we've hit salat in this, basically this discussion of ahkam and the rulings, we're also going to delve a little bit into the secrets of salat. And basically some of the ahadith that explain to us what each and every part of salat is symbolizing and what it stands for. So we were doing that. I'm going to go through a quick review of what we discussed in our last session. And inshallah, afterwards, we will continue with the new content that we want to discuss in today's session. So we started explaining, number one, what are the arkan of salat. This seems like everyone knows the answer to this question, but the reason why we're emphasizing this so much is because when you know what the arkan of salat are, then if someone does, basically you can answer a whole bunch of questions when you know what the arkan of your prayer are. Because once you know that, then anytime you do anything where you're not sure, specifically if you do something unknowingly, right, unintentionally in your salat, that intentionally would have created a problem for your prayer, but unintentionally you didn't pay attention to it, then you know, as long as you didn't mess up with the arkan, then you know yourself that your salat is going to be valid. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is because this can answer so many questions that people have if they just understand this one principle. So what are the arkan? Obviously, intention is the first rukn that we have. We'll discuss intention. We did a last session, and I'll go through the review very quickly. And then after that, of course, is takbiratul ihram and the qiyam that comes with takbiratul ihram. The qiyam before we go to ruku', and then ruku' and both sajdas together. So both sajdas together are going to make one rukn for us. That means if someone skips one sajda, by mistake, their salat is not batil. There are some situations where they have to make up for that sajda, and that's something we'll discuss once we get to the topic of sajda. The topic of sajda actually has two main components. One big discussion is going to be about what are the things that we can do sajda on, and the other one is going to be what are the what do you do if you skip one of your sajdas. These two components we'll talk about when we get to the discussion on sajda. Okay, so those are what the arkan are. So we started from the beginning. We said niyat. What is niyat? Very shortly and briefly, niyat means you know what you're doing. You should know which prayer you're praying. Yes, if you don't know which prayer you're praying, then obviously your namaz, your salat is going to be batil. We said that if someone is praying and they have other intentions, other than the fact that they're praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have some other motive, basically, right? Like teaching someone else, or like praying in front of their children, for example. Maybe because they want to show their children the importance of prayer, right? We said all of these, if they can connect that second motive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in one way or another, then that's fine as well. If not, then yes, it is going to be a problem. But 99% of the time, these other motives that we have are fine. It's not a problem. You're praying in front of other people. Why? Because I want to show the importance of salat, or I want to show that salat is, I want to set like a precedent or a culture of people praying, or people praying on time, right? Especially for my children. So none of this would really be too much of an issue. So we moved on from that. That was niyat. We moved on to takbir. Now, of course, in the books, whether it be Ayatollah Sistani's books or Ayatollah Khamenei's books, the discussions are much, much longer than what I'm going through. I'm really just trying to go through the stuff that we actually deal with on a frequent basis. Otherwise, they have long discussions. This niyat has a long discussion on it. Takbir, which I've basically summarized into like 2-3 rulings, has, I think, like 15 different rulings in these books. But this is just the stuff that we actually deal with frequently. So first question we have to ask here is what if I have a doubt whether I said takbir or not? This can happen in different situations. Sometimes you're praying on your own. Sometimes you're praying with jama'at. What we know for sure is that if you have started doing the stuff that a person who had said takbir would have been doing, then you disregard your doubt at that point. So, for example, I started with my hamd and surah, right? And now I have a doubt. Did I say my takbir or not? Then you just carry on with your salat. Or if I'm in a jama'at, I don't know, did I say takbir? And the imam has already started doing surah hamd, and I was listening to him, right? That's something you would do if you had said takbir. So if you're doing that, then you disregard that doubt at that point. So that's takbiratul ihram. Not much to cover in takbiratul ihram in terms of the rulings. There was a dua to be recited, and we posted this in the comment section of last session. It's a really beautiful dua, and I explained about that, so I'm not going to go over that again. One ruling that I will mention is that this idea of bringing up the hands, we explained a little bit about the philosophy behind it, but it is important to mention that this is mustahab, and it's actually not wajib. I know a lot of us would associate this with salat and prayer, and that's because that's the way we were taught with regards to salat and prayer. But it's actually mustahab, it's not wajib. So technically someone can have their hands down and just say Allahu Akbar. That's not going to create a problem for their prayer. And this is why it's interesting in hadith, if I'm not mistaken, the 6th Imam salawatullahi alayhi, he says that this idea of raising the hands to the ears for saying the first takbir, this is the zina of prayer. He calls it like the ornament, right? And if you think about it, it really makes it look a lot more beautiful when you do it that way as well. So it's actually not wajib, it's mustahab, although it's a great mustahab to do, so don't stop doing it. but yeah, that's what we covered with regards to takbir. Assalamu alaikum to everybody who has joined us. Very nice to have you guys with us. I think we had a question, so I'm just going to finish the review and then I'll get to the question in just a second. So why do we do takbir? If you remember last session, we discussed 4 different points, and these 4 different points, none of them contradict one another, right? They're just at 4 different, maybe you could call them the 4 different levels of looking at it, right? So the first thing was that this one was from the 6th Imam salawatullahi alayhi. He said that when you want to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you want to show respect, you have to make everything else seem smaller in your eyes. That's why you say takbir. You say Allahu Akbar, he's bigger, he is going to draw more of your attention, right? So he said that's the reason why you say takbir. Okay. And then other ahadith, they had discussions about why it is that you say 7 takbirs. We mentioned last week that 1 takbir is wajib, 7 takbirs is mustahab. So why are these 7 takbirs mustahab? One hadith said that as the Prophet was moving up into the skies during Mi'raj, this was 7 curtains, whatever that is referring to in that world, basically. But every one of these curtains were removed when the Prophet was doing takbir. فَكَبَّرَ عِنْدَ كُلِّ حِجَابٍ تَكْبِيرَةً فَأَوْصَلَهُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ بِذَلِكَ إِلَى مُنْتَهَى الْكَرَامَةِ. Every time he said takbir and he was able to move upwards. So this is basically removing, it's supposed to symbolize removing barriers between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then in the second hadith, the Imam explained a little bit more. This one was from the first Imam. If you remember, he was going somewhere and he saw somebody praying. He asked them, do you know the philosophy and the reason behind these different parts of salat? And the guy was a little dumbfounded, and he was like, what philosophy are you talking about? And the Imam explained to him that every one of these 7 takbirs, it has a meaning. In each one of these, you are saying God is greater than a certain thing. And I'm going to go through all the 7. We discussed this last week, right? That like one of them was to show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater, for example, than objects. He is greater than to be described. He is greater than to have different states, to change, basically, to go from one state to another state, right? Or from one status to another status. So that was the second hadith that we mentioned about that. And the third one was that the reason why it's mustahab for someone to say the 7 takbirat at the beginning is because if you look throughout salat, these 7 takbirat correspond with the 7 takbirat that you have in salat, which is basically those other takbirs that we say when we go to ruku, when we get up from ruku, and you go to sajda and get up from sajda and all that stuff. The Imam said that because these correspond with those, when you say all 7 at the beginning, this way if you forget a takbir during the salat, you really haven't missed out on it, basically. So that was a third hadith that the Imams had mentioned. And alongside this point, these ahadith, we explained that these other takbirs that we say throughout the prayer, they're actually not wajib. They're mustahab, and therefore someone can go to ruku and sajda and all that stuff without saying anything, really. Those are all mustahab, and it's great to do them, but they're not wajib. Okay. So quick question. Let me see. Sister Shermeen has asked a question. Shaykh, if we start reading tashahhud in 3rd rakat of a 4 rakat salat, and a few words into it realize it is our 3rd rakat, and get up for our 4th rakat, do we have to do sajda sahw for it? So that's something that we'll get to later on. But as far as I know, no, you would not have to do sajda sahw for that. As far as I remember doing sajda sahw, it's mustahab to do for anything that you add or you take away from your salat unintentionally, but that's not one of the places where it will become wajib to do sajda to sahw. All right, and Brother Mohammed Hussein has copy-pasted that dua, very beautiful dua. It basically explained that, Ya Allah, you have told us that when a bad guy comes to a good guy, when a good person, a bad person comes to a good person, the good person is supposed to forgive him. And here I am standing in front of you. I'm the bad person. You're the good person. So you know what to do, basically. فَتَجَاوَزَ عَنْ قَبِيحَ مَا تَعْلَمُ مِنِّي. All right. Brother Bilal is asking, raising our hands, Shaykh. I believe sh ... is the proper. Sh ... is, I don't know if that's short for Shaykh. And then 3 more dots is the proper, probably the rest of your question. Is the proper way palms facing forward or palms facing cheek? It's palms facing forward. So it's supposed to go like this. And they say that it's better not to have gaps between the fingers. All right. So that was basically up until now we've covered takbir. Obviously after takbir comes the qiyam. Or you might even say that, doing qiyam with takbir is wajib. And in the last session we said that there are 4 qiyams in prayer. There's one that you have to do while you're doing takbiratul ihram. There's another one that you have to do before going to ruku. There's another one where you get up from ruku. And then there is the qiyam that you have to basically be standing up when you're doing hamd and surah in the 1st and 2nd rakah, and the tasbihat in the 3rd and 4th rakah. The reason why we broke these down is because we mentioned last week that each and every one of these is wajib in and of itself. So if someone can do some of them, then they have to do at least those some that they can do. So if someone can get up for some of these qiyams, it is wajib for them to actually get up for those qiyams, okay? And obviously when someone is doing qiyam, you can't lean on anything, you can't pick up your feet. If someone wants to pick up their feet, right, like we commonly do, we move around and we shift around, that's fine, but you can't be saying dhikr, because qiyam, part of qiyam is having your feet on the ground. So your qiyam, basically your qiyam while doing hamd and surah is going to be interfered with. If you're doing hamd and surah, or you're doing tasbihat arba and your feet are, you know, shifting or whatever. But it's completely fine. You just have to cut off the dhikr for a second, and then you can continue after that. All right. Now, I want to move on a little bit to the mustahabbat of qiyam. And when I say the mustahabbat of qiyam, it's not so much just going through the rulings. I want to go through some of the, we have some rulings here, but I want to go through a very beautiful hadith that the 8th Imam has mentioned. And this is a really beautiful one. It's a little bit of a longer one, so I don't know how much of it we'll get through. So, what are the mustahabbat of qiyam? Just like from Ayatollah Sistani's book, let's just say it that way first. First is for you to stand straight, not to, like, some people stand but they're like kind of leaning. And number 2 is any type of movement that happens, and the Imam will go through some of the details in this regard. When I say any type of movement like scratching and moving around, and it's interesting in the hadith, based on the translation, even like the, you know, breaking your knuckles is mentioned. That's not good to do it, right? In the sense that it's better not to do it. It is mustahab to put your hands on your thighs. It's not wajib, but it's mustahab, because they say you're standing just like a servant stands in front of his master. And we know that men, it's mustahab for them to have their feet a little bit more open, and women to have it almost touching each other when they're standing in qiyam. Okay, let me move on to the hadith. Hadith is, like I mentioned, from the 8th Imam. He says, وَإِيَّاكَ أَن تَكْسَلَ عَنْهَا أَوْ تَتَوَانَ فِيهَا أَوْ تَتَهَامَنَ بِحَقِّهَا. He's talking about salat. He's saying, listen, don't you dare ever take this lightly. Make sure that you deliver your salat the proper way that it has to be done. أَوْ تُضَيِّعَ حَدَّهَا. Basically, the best translation for this would be, make sure you're doing justice to your prayer, right? And it's interesting, he says, أَوْ تُنَقِّرُهَا نَقْرَ الدِّيكِ. He says, don't do your salat the way, basically, a chicken goes up and down, right? Because when chicken eat, right, they go up and down quickly, right? And they're picking up their food with their mouth, basically. He says, don't make your salat like the salat of an animal who just goes up and down and doesn't understand what's happening. أو تستخف بها أو تشتغل عنها. And then he continues explaining about the importance of salat, and I want to move on to the part that has to do with qiyam in particular. He says, فَإِذَا أَرَدْتَ أَن تَقُومَ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَلَا تَقُومُ إِلَيْهَا مُتَكَاسِلًا. He says, when you want to get up and you want to stand up and you want to do your salat, فَلَا تَقُومُ إِلَيْهَا مُتَكَاسِلًا. Don't get up while you're feeling lazy. وَلَا مُتَنَاعِسًا. Don't do it while you feel sleepy. And these are the Imam is saying you have to get rid of these states that you're in. وَلَا مُسْتَعْجِلًا. Don't get up while you're in a hurry. وَلَا مُتَلَاهِيًا. Don't get up like it's just a game, right? And you're not taking it seriously. وَلَكِنْ تَأْتِيهَا عَلَى السُّكُونِ وَالْوَقَارِ وَالتَّأَدُّهِ. He says, rather get up with a certain, you pray with a certain grace, right? You move with a certain grace when you're preparing for the salat. And he continues, I don't want to go through the whole hadith, I want to move on to the part specifically that has to do with qiyam. He says this, فَقِفْ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ كَالْعَبْدِ الْآبِقِ الْمُذْنِبِ بَيْنَ يَدَيْ مَوْلَهِ. This is such a very beautiful description. The Imam says, stand in front of, stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way a servant who has done basically something wrong and has ran away, right? He has fled from his master, and now they've returned him, right? So this is actually a concept that you will find over and over in our ahadith. A servant who's ran away, because like this was like the ultimate symbol of disobedience, that a servant would like abandon his master and would get up and just leave, right? That's why in many of our hadith, this is mentioned as this idea of a servant running away. They've used this concept to basically explain different issues, right? Anytime they want to show that you're standing in front of someone and you feel humiliated and humble in front of that person, a lot of times the imams will use this metaphor, the metaphor of the servant who fled and the servant who ran away. He says, stand in front of him like you're that servant who fled. Now that, let's just say hypothetically, they captured you, they brought you back. How do you stand in front of a master in that sense, right? فَصُفَّ قَدَمَيْكَ. So when you put your feet down, make sure they're straight. وَانصِبْ نَفْسَكَ, and stand straight. وَلَا تَلْتَفِتْ يَمِينًا وَشِمَالًا, right? Don't lean to the right and don't lean to the right, to the left. وَتَحْسِبْ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ فَإِنْ لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ, and think and assume that he sees you, because if you can't see him, he can definitely see you. And he continues, he says, وَلَا تَعْبَثْ بِلِحْيَتِكَ, and don't play with your beard when you're in this status of qiyam. وَلَا بِشَيْءٍ مِّن جَوَارِحِكَ, and don't play with any of your, the body parts. It might be like you're playing with your fingers, or you're playing with whatever the case may be, right? He says, don't play with these jawarih. وَلَا تُفَرْقِعْ أَصَابِعَكَ. Asabi' means the fingers, and based on the translations, that means like don't break your knuckles, right? وَلَا تَحُكَّ بَدَنَكَ, don't scratch your body. These are like, this is of course stuff that we just read to understand the level at which these imams used to pray. But we just have to move in that direction, right? This is scratching, of course, that's gonna, like, it's extra scratching, or like the type of scratching, like you get bored, someone is scratching their arm, for example, right? وَلَا تُولَعْ بِأَنْفِكَ وَلَا بِثَوْبِكَ وَلَا تُسَلِّمْ وَأَنْتَ مُتَلَثِّمْ. And then he moves on with this. And then he says, وَلَا تَتَّكِئْ مَرَّةً عَلَى إِحْدَى رِجْلَيْكَ, and when you're standing, don't put more weight on one of your legs. وَصَلِّ, and I'll end inshallah with this line. وَصَلِّ صَلَاةَ مُوَدِّعٍ تَرَى أَنَّكَ لَا تُصَلِّي أَبَدًا. And it says, whenever you stand and you want to pray as the one who is salata muwaddi'an. He is doing wada', right? We do wada' means saying goodbye. Like it's the last time he is going to pray. La tusalli abadan. He's not going to pray after this at all. That's how this person has to come and pray. So he goes on to some more detail, and the hadith actually continues. It goes into ruku and into sajda and all that stuff. And this idea of bringing up the hands and stuff like that, he explains that over here in this hadith as well. But inshallah, those we can cover as we move on. So these are some of the, these aren't really asrar as-salat, these are more adab as-salat and the etiquette of how we are supposed to offer our prayers. Okay. Assalamu alaikum to everyone else who's joined us. Just wanted to check see if we have any questions. Yes, Sister Safinas is asking, can qiyam be divided into rukni and non-rukni qiyam? Yes. The two qiyams that are rukn, that you absolutely cannot mess up with, is the qiyam when someone is saying takbiratul ihram, and number two is the qiyam before ruku, not after ruku, the qiyam before ruku. Okay, those two. But when I say rukni and non-rukni, we're not saying like important and non-important. We're saying like very important and important, basically. So when I say rukni and non-rukni, it doesn't mean like we can skip any part of it. But yes, that's how we would divide those two, basically. Brother Muhammad Hussein is saying, I've seen when praying with Sunni brothers that if someone joining the Jamaat, that sometimes if there are two people in the prayer and a third person joins, the second person will walk backwards to join the saf of the person who joined. If we are in this position in praying with our Sunni brothers/sisters, should we redo our prayer since we physically walk backwards to join the saf behind? As far as I know, that's a good question, Brother Muhammad Hussein. The first time I saw that, I was a little confused a little bit as well. But yeah, that's just some of the rulings that they have with regards to when you're praying with two people, how do you stand? And when you're praying with three people, how would you stand? And it would kind of correlate also to what what we do a little bit. The only difference is that when we're praying with two people, usually we don't stand beside each other or closely to each other, even though technically you would be able to do it. But anyways, as far as I know, no, that wouldn't create a problem with regards to your salat, because we mentioned this before as well, that this idea of taking steps in salat is not really one of the mubtilat of salat. Like when you go through the mubtilat of salat, this is not one of them. So you can technically do that. And as far as I know, I haven't seen anywhere saying going backward or frontward or to the left or to the right specifically would create a problem with regards to the salat. So as far as I know, yes, you would not be able to say any dhikr when this is happening, but as far as I know, it wouldn't create any problem. Brother Nisar is asking, is there praying in paradise? Praying is anything that, paradise is, we actually had this question from someone else a couple days ago. I told them, I said, listen, if you want to pray in paradise, you pray in paradise. If you don't want to pray in paradise, then the praying might be in a different form altogether, right? So, I mean, paradise is لَهُمْ مَا يَشَاءُونَ فِيهَا, وَفِيهَا مَا تَشْتَهِيهِ الْأَنفُسِ. Whatever someone wants is in there. So at that point, if someone wants to pray, they'll pray. If someone doesn't want to pray, they won't pray. Naturally, if someone is a believer, there's going to be some sort of praise they're doing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So maybe for some it might be praying in the same way that we were praying in this world. So some it might be a different way of praying in the sense that they just praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They might be thanking Him. They say, Alhamdulillahi alladhi, that famous dua that's mentioned that the people of heaven always say. I forgot in many... Yeah, I can't remember the dua right now. Yeah, if anyone remembers, let me know. But it says, Alhamdulillahi alladhi, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who prepared all of this, and if it wasn't for Him, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have all of these different things. So praying might take on different forms at that point. Brother Muhammad Hussein is asking, should I keep my turba in my hand then if I'm praying in that case? Yes. So praying with brothers and sisters from Ahlul Sunnah is a discussion. Ayatollah Khamenei basically says that it's allowed for someone to pray with Ahlul Sunnah if it's done with the motive of promoting unity. That's what he says. Ayatollah Sistani, as far as I know, he has a similar ruling. He just says that the hamd and the surah, the person would have to also say it themselves, but quietly in the salat. So that would be Ayatollah Sistani's ruling. So with regards to turba, yes, if you can keep your turba in your hand, then yes, you would do that. Okay. How can we help motivate our kids to pray? That's of course a longer discussion. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but so just very briefly, the idea of like one thing that I've seen a lot of parents do, and I know this because I'm in touch with a lot of parents at this point and a lot of kids, and Islam has to be taught as a comprehensive religion. It cannot be taught as, okay, you have to pray 5 times a day. If a child starts to understand the comprehensiveness of Islam and how it's a lifestyle and a portion of it is salat, and he understands the reasoning behind this whole this whole religion of Islam, and this religion answers many questions of this child, then it's going to be a lot easier to get this child to pray, right? But if we reduce Islam to just pray 5 times a day, and this child understands nothing about Islam, and sometimes it's because maybe the parents haven't understood anything about Islam other than that either. The only thing they understand is, just you have to pray 5 times a day. Then it's going to be very difficult to motivate them to do something like that. So that's one big part of it. Giving depth to the understanding of the religion, and that a lot of times parents can't do that because parents aren't experts in that field anyways. It's like expecting me to explain to someone why smoking is bad. Well, I'm not an expert in that field, right? So that's one point to remember. And then at the same time, if they're very young and a very young age, then it's something that has to start at a very young age and just getting them in the habit of understanding, making this something normal and common in the house, that, oh, this is what we do in the house. Like, we get up and we sit down and we do this ruku and sajda and all this stuff, and also seeing the parents doing it as well, and putting some sort of prize for them and all that stuff. So that's a longer discussion, but these are some of the points that can definitely help with that. Sister Safinas is asking, is there a philosophy behind qiyam like there is for ruku and sajda? Yes. So that's actually, we're gonna use that as a we're going to move on, inshallah, right into that. So what is the philosophy behind qiyam? What is qiyam supposed to basically symbolize? So there's multiple philosophies that they've mentioned, right? One is this, that when someone stands in qiyam, it should remind this person of the qiyam that this person is going to do in the day of judgment, right? Like, in the day of judgment, everyone is going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, not physically, but the verses of the Quran say, يَوْمَ يَقُومُ النَّاسُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Everyone gets up, everyone is resurrected, and everyone is standing there being, basically, they're being accounted for, basically. This idea of being judged, some say that this is what qiyam is supposed to stand for, right? So the verses of the Quran say at the end of Surah An-Naba, يَوْمَ يَقُومُ الرُّوحُ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ صَفًّا. When all the angels and everyone comes, they stand there saffan, in lines and in rows, right? Like, completely obedience. That moment where everyone is standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, some say that this is what qiyam is supposed to symbolize. And those are very beautiful verses. لا يتكلمون إلا من أذن له الرحمن وقال صوابا. No one speaks on that day unless they're saying something like, worthwhile. That's what sawaba, worthwhile, right? ذلك اليوم الحق. You don't open your mouth and say anything false. Nothing false goes on that day. Then some say no, qiyam is there to symbolize resistance and standing in the face of difficulties, right? Like, you're standing up against them, right? So those are some of the philosophies that are mentioned with regards to qiyam. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to qira'at. Well, when I say qira'at, we basically mean the qira'at that we do in the first two rak'at, is hamd and surah, of course, and then in the third and fourth, you can either do hamd again, or you can do the tasbihatul arba'a, right? So let's start from here. I'll go through some rulings very quickly that have to do with the qira'at of hamd and surah, and then we'll move on to tasbihat, and then I'll explain a little bit about the philosophy behind why is it that we have to do Quran in every salat, why is it that there's no salat except that it has to have Fatiha in it, and then we'll move on also to the philosophy behind tasbihatul arba'a. Why are there four, and what do these four basically stand for? So we'll get to that in just a second. So number one is that certain surahs, they have to be recited together. They're both considered one surah. So when someone does the hamd and then you want to do another surah, if you're doing one of these surahs, you have to do them together. So Ad-Duha and Alam Nashrah, these are together, and Surah Fil and Surah Quraysh, these are also together according to obligatory precaution. This goes back to a discussion about whether these two surahs are two separate surahs or they're the same surah, they're continuation of one another, right? And hopefully it's clear that in Salat after Hamd, within the Shia school of thought, it's understood that you have to recite a surah. Within the Sunni school of thought, no, that's not the case. You just have to recite part of the Quran, right? And it's interesting. I say this because I'm into listening to these recitations of the Quran. A lot of these recitations of the Quran that we listen to you'll find that they're like this. Like, the person starts, he doesn't even do a full surah. He does like 15 verses or 20 verses from a certain surah. That's where that's coming from, because they don't consider it wajib for it to be one surah. At least some of them don't. So that's ruling number one. Ruling number two, which we mentioned before, is that if you're running out of time, you can skip over the surah. That's not a problem. Ruling number 3 is changing surahs is not okay if you have gone past the middle of the surah, right? And also, if you were doing Surah Kafirun or Surah Qul Huwallah, you cannot change the surah at all. So that's the ruling with regards to those. Moving on, there is one issue that I want to discuss here, a little bit of detail here, and that is this. We know that for, Subh and Fajr and Maghrib and Isha, we have to do out loud for the brothers. Now, what is the criterion, or basically what constitutes praying out loud? What does it mean when they say pray out loud? So, Ayatollah Sistani says it doesn't matter whether you're whispering or talking normally. That's not what makes your prayer like jahr or ikhfat, right? That's not the difference basically between Maghrib and Isha and Dhuhr and Asr. No, what matters is whether the other people can hear you or not, right? Whether your volume is low or high. Now, please, brothers and sisters, don't fall into this thing. I mean, I've had multiple people mention this to me before. That yes, Shaykh, I've heard that when I recite, the person in the other line has to hear me. No, none of that is there. Our maraji have not mentioned this kind of stuff. They just say, Orfan, in the common view, they would say this person is praying at a volume that people say he's praying out loud, as opposed to a person who is not doing that, right? He's praying quietly, right? So it's very urfi, basically, and I've explained this concept of urf multiple times before. For Ayatollah Khamenei, for him, it's pretty much the same thing. It's a slightly different ruling, but technically it will basically end up being the same thing, right? He says that it's not about whether you're whispering or not. It's about whether you bring out the basically what they call the jawhar of your voice. We don't have to worry about that. It's pretty much the same thing. So basically he would also be going with the volume, not necessarily whether you're whispering or you're not whispering. So for Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani, the difference between jahr and ikhfat, the difference between praying out loud and quietly, has to do with volume mainly, not so much whether you're whispering or you're not whispering. Okay, so let's move on from that. Next question is if I was praying, or next ruling is if I was praying my salat, but I was making a mistake about the harakat or the huruf, in terms of pronouncing the huruf of the surah or the hamd that I was reciting. Is that a problem? If you were making a mistake and you were not aware of this, then that's fine, right? Like I know many people, they might be saying wala zallin. Okay, now if someone says this knowingly, or they know that this is not the way surah hamd is supposed to be recited, this will make your salat batil. So that's why it's a good idea that if you find someone, it doesn't have to be a shaykh, it might even be someone who's Arab. You sit down with them and you ask them to just listen to you recite your hamd and surah once. It's a good idea. But if someone didn't know, like this is how they were taught and it never occurred to their mind that this is not, then their prayers are okay, but moving forward they would have to correct that from that point onwards. And so that's with regards to qira'at. With regards to basically tasbihatul arba'a, the only ruling that I have to mention is that tasbihatul arba'a is one is enough. So this is according to Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei. Both of them say that one is enough. So you can say one and go to ruku, that's not a problem. Okay, some of the mustahabbat of qira'at I'm going to go through. We have just about 6 minutes left, so let me just see if we have any questions. Assalamu alaikum to everyone else. Sister Hiba is asking, what if we keep volume loud for surah and are praying with Ahlus Sunnah, Fajr, Maghrib and Isha? So let me think. What if we keep the volume loud for surah? So as I mentioned, if someone is praying, like Ayatollah Sistani says, if someone is praying with Ahlus Sunnah, they should be doing their hamd and surah as well, but they should be doing it quietly. So if you shouldn't be doing it out loud, right? Even if it's Maghrib and Isha. Maybe that's the question that she's referring to. Even if it's Maghrib or Isha or Fajr, you're supposed to be doing it quietly because you're part of that Jamaat. So hopefully that answers that question. Let me just go through some of the mustahabbat of qira'at. First of all, it's mustahab to say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim before you start the surah. And obviously in Dhuhr and Asr prayer, it's mustahab to say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim out loud. Jahran. And that's why it's mentioned in the hadith that like this is one of the signs of the mu'min, this and along with other things. One thing that's mustahab is that when you reach the end of each verse, it's mustahab to stop at the end of each verse, right? So that's something that's good to do. It's mustahab to pay attention to the meaning. And it's also mustahab to say كَذَلِكَ اللَّهُ رَبِّي after you recite قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ. So a lot of people think that this كَذَلِكَ اللَّهُ رَبِّي is like when you want to do qunut. It's actually when you end with the surah. But anyways, this one that I'm about to mention is the reason why I even brought up this topic. One mustahab of the mustahabbat of qira'at is this, that between surah Hamd and the next surah that you recite, you say, or basically this is only with regards to Jamaat prayer. You say, or the ma'mumeen say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Actually, forgive me, this is not only with regards to Jamaat prayer, but this comes up mainly when we're doing Jamaat, right? So the reason why I'm mentioning this is this. We know that our brothers and sisters from Ahlus Sunnah, they say Ameen. Again, when I listen to those recitations all the time, right? Some of the most beautiful voices. They say Waladdaleen. Everyone says Ameen, right? So the question that comes up is, what's going on? Why is it that we say you cannot say Ameen? We believe if someone says Ameen, based on the Shia jurisprudence, their salat is batil, right? Not within the Sunni jurisprudence. That's a different discussion. But yet we say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So why is this? Why Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen and not Ameen? Okay. So to be honest, we have no idea why it is that this is allowed and that's not allowed. But that's not how we go about rulings, especially these detailed rulings, especially when it comes to salat or like fasting, right? So the point I'm trying to explain is this. Here, all of the maraji, but at least the mainstream maraji, they will tell you, you cannot say Ameen, but you can say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. But why? Well, they will say, we don't know why. The only difference is that in hadith, we have been told specifically between Hamd and Surah, you can say this phrase, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. But you cannot say anything else. Like you cannot say Ameen. Okay, so the only difference is hadith telling us that you can say this one and you cannot say that one. That's why we would refer to saying Ameen as something that we would consider unprescribed, or I mean, they would use this word like bid'ah in the sense that it hasn't been prescribed in our religion in this specific way. But when it comes to Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, we would not take that position. So my point is, we don't even know why this one is allowed and that one's not allowed. All we know is that this one has been prescribed in hadith, the other one has not been prescribed in hadith. And it's simply because of that if someone says the other one, their salat is batil. If they say this one, their salat is valid and it's in fact mustahab, right? So this is basically I wanted to bring this up because this clarifies this concept of how we go about things in Islam. It's always good to ask for the reasoning behind things. That's not a problem, right? But we have to understand sometimes we don't know the reasoning. So what differentiates good and bad and right and wrong? It's not necessarily the philosophy in our intellect. No, we go to hadith and especially with regards to many of the details, we go to hadith. And hadith tells us, okay, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. And if you do this one, your salat is completely fine. If you do the other one, your salat is completely batil. This is because salat is one of those things that for every detail of it, you need a prescription. You need something that has been prescribed. Salat is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just told us to go about and improvise, right? No, salat, every detail of it, if you're doing it as part of something that is part of salat, every part of it has to be prescribed. That's why we would refer to that one as like, unprescribed. We'd say, oh, this would make your salat batil. But with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, you say it, your salat is not batil, not only that, it's actually mustahab as well. Okay, so we're up with our time. Inshallah, next session we'll continue. I wanted to explain this very beautiful hadith Qudsi that we have that explains how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken Surah Al-Hamd and has split it, basically divided it between himself and his servant. It's a very beautiful hadith that we'll go through. And also we'll go through the philosophy behind why is it that we have to recite these surahs in the beginning of salat. And also tasbihatul arba'a, why is there 4 and what does that correspond to? At least what do the ahadith tell us about this and in this regard. Okay. Thank you very much for being with us. Let me just check to see if we have any questions. Okay, no questions. Thank you very much. We'll continue next week. And if anyone is watching after the broadcast is live, then you can always send us questions to the inbox of Mizan Institute. Shaykh Amin will be with you guys tomorrow, inshallah. And that's about it. Thank you very much. We'll see you, inshallah, next time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.